So where are we sitting right now?
Right now, we are in the Fall Street Visitor Center at Women's Rights National Historical Park in Seneca Falls, New York.
And what is this place?
This is a National Historical Park, which is a special designation within the National Park Service that recognizes those culturally and historically significant institutions and locations in American history.
And what do we have that we recognize here?
Well, a lot of people are not all that familiar with this site. So things that you might recognize would be Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the planners of the very first Women's Rights Convention here in Seneca Falls in 1848. The Visitor Center has a museum, a bookstore, and the primary exhibit is the bronze statues depicting the day of the convention, which brought more than 300 people here to talk about the civil, religious, and social condition of women. Here at Women's Rights National Historical Park, we commemorate the 1848 convention on the social, civil, and religious rights of women. It was the first public meeting of its kind, following on the heels of a lot of discussion in this country about what it meant to be an American and what it meant to be a citizen of this country. These are questions that a new nation was really struggling with. And in 1848, folks were very concerned with the issue of slavery and what was the nature of human rights. As women, particularly within the Quaker congregations, but really people all over the country and all over the world, were sort of trying to decide what is owed to us as human beings. And the women who were involved in that started to realize that they were not getting their due, that they were not being treated equal to their male peers. At the same time that they're arguing for the universal rights of human beings, they're not getting those rights for themselves. And there were a lot of conversations going on about this for a long time, but in 1848, a group of women who were at the intersection of a lot of these conversations got together for a relatively social event. They got together for a tea party, which was sort of a baby shower for one of them. And they started talking about things in their lives that we all talk about. They talked about their families, their kids, their jobs, what they were doing, and started to realize a great deal of dissatisfaction that they shared. They found this shared issue. Now, a lot of us would have stopped at that point and said, gosh, it feels so good to find somebody who feels me. And instead, they decided to take their issues to the streets. They held a convention at the time, a conference we would probably call it today. They invited as many people as they could get together. They took only 10 days and managed to rally more than 300 people to come to this town in Seneca Falls, New York, to discuss these really important issues. And that meeting brought this conversation to the public, to the forefront, and was in some ways the beginning of the formal women's rights movement in the United States.
What were some of the things that they talked about?
They talked about the law a great deal, about what was their condition under the law. At that time, women had very few rights under the law. So they did not keep the money that they earned. They could not go to school. They could not vote. Anything that a woman possessed was actually the property of her nearest male relative for a very long time. They discussed how important it was that they be able to be paid equally for the work that they did when they were allowed to work. They discussed, most importantly, education was a huge topic of discussion, that girls and women should be allowed to have access to higher education so that they could attain their professional goals. And they talked about what their social responsibilities were as moral people. In many cases, women who committed crimes were not held accountable for those crimes because of the laws called coverture, which meant that a woman didn't exist separate from her husband in the eyes of the law.
I don't love that. I'm just going to come right out and interject. Do not love that.
It also meant that in any cases of divorce or separation, child custody was another issue. A husband or a brother could sell a woman's children at that time, which is a horrifying thought. So really, there are a lot of domestic issues, there are a lot of professional issues, there are a lot of cultural issues, and those came out in a document called the Declaration of Sentiments. Now, as I said, this is an exercise from the New Republic, right? People are very familiar with the phrase We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Well, the Declaration of Sentiments begins the same way as that preamble. It starts with, when in the course of human events, and continues that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. They made that connection explicit. They used that language that was very familiar from the Declaration of Independence so that people would understand that this was a conversation about Americans and how we should view each other as human beings.
When people come into the museum, is that what you do when they come here to this spot in Seneca Falls? Do you give them tours and show them around and tell them these stories?
Here at Women's Rights, you can actually visit the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel, which was the location of that convention in 1848. It is part of the park, and folks can visit it, see it approximately as it was the day of the convention. You can go in there and experience that space and experience the town of Seneca Falls near the canal that would have brought so many people, the roads and the railroads that would have brought people, this intersection of all these different transportation and communication routes. The Elizabeth Cady Stanton House is here, and beginning in Women's History Month, in the month of March, we do open the house up so that people can take tours and visit, listen to rangers tell about Elizabeth Cady Stanton's life and the beginnings of her lifelong efforts as a suffragist, as a women's rights advocate that began here in Seneca Falls.
Why would that be a cool thing to do, to come here and take advantage of something like that?
I think for a lot of people, it brings history to life. There is something about walking the same route, looking out the same windows as a person that you don't know, that gives you a sense of the perspective that they might have had. For me, it has always been a question of putting myself in their shoes and realizing that in a different time, in a different place, I would have had a different life. So we hope that when people come here, they can understand a little bit about where those people were coming from and also where we have to go. This is a place where some very intelligent people came together, some experienced women, some who were less experienced with the public, and they were inspired, they were motivated, they really felt moved to make a difference, which is not something that you feel everywhere, but we hope that we can communicate that to the folks that visit us. Women's Rights National Historical Park was designated in 1980. This was a period of time when women's history was starting to really capture public imagination. And it is like the 1848 convention, the culmination of a lot of discourse and a lot of effort before that. But in 1980, we were finally designated as a national park. We have a very broad name. Women's rights is a really big idea, and it doesn't solely exist here. There are lots of places throughout the Park Service, but when we were designated, it was around the same time that this national attention is being put on the role of women in the formation of America and in history in general. Women's history is history. It's not separate from that. We don't get to peel out one person's history from the thread, the web of human events, but sometimes it's really important to highlight those things and to make sure that when we talk about history, we recognize that the experience is not the same for everyone, and that those individual threads that form the web of our human existence and our human history have different resonance for different people. And we want to make sure that we see a complete picture. And so bringing women's history in the early 1980s to the forefront was part of our national agenda. So the first Women's History Week was proclaimed in 1981, and every year thereafter until 1987, when Women's History Month was proclaimed. This has really helped us to focus on a more inclusive version of history. Even here at Women's Rights National Historical Park, we're working to have a more inclusive vision of history. We've taken a lot of time since our designation to really look at who was here, who was part of the conversation, and who was excluded. So Women's History Month is in some ways our time to shine, for people to come and see what we do here and to ask those important questions. What happened here? How did it impact me as a person in my life as I know it? But also, whose story am I not hearing? We talk about Frederick Douglass, who was invited here specifically to this convention, but he was the only person of color who was specifically invited. The record of the experience of the African Americans who lived here during that time hasn't been recorded as well. So here at the park, we're working on finding all of the stories around the convention and really exploring how it fits into the larger picture. And if you come here, you can be a part of that too. You can ask those questions and maybe stump a ranger.
There you go.
But hopefully find some answers for yourself as well.
What does Women's History Month mean to you personally?
I am of a generation where Women's History Month was starting, around the same time I was. My first experience here at Women's Rights National Historical Park was when I was 8. I came here to a day camp at the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House, and the fact that was being promoted, that my community here in the Finger Lakes paid special attention to that, shaped my entire life. It shaped my career goals. It shaped my understanding of how the world works and how I fit into it. So Women's History Month has been a very important part of my education.
What events are coming up, and where can people go to find out about events in our area?
Well, all of the things that Women's Rights is doing are on our website. They're on our calendar. You can go to www.nps.gov/women's rights, or you can just Google us like most people do. But our website has a list of all the programs that we'll be doing at the Wesleyan Chapel, as well as at the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House, and talks at the museum here as well.
I'm the lead park ranger, the only park ranger, but the lead park ranger for the site. So it's me and a staff of 4 park guides, and we provide all the interpretive programs here at Women's Rights National Historical Park.
All right, we got Women's Rights Month. What is it? First of all, what does that mean to you?
So Women's History Month is just a chance to reconnect.
Women's History Month.
Yeah.
I said we're at Women's Rights. Women's History Month.
It's a chance to reconnect. It's a chance to kind of refocus and to kind of bring a little attention to things that we're not given attention to. It's, we tend to think, same with many of the other specialty months, it's a time to focus and reconnect. It's also a time to delve into these stories that are rich and awesome and beautiful and fun and exciting and all those different things that oftentimes get missed in the kind of the typical things we talk about. So it's just that chance. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to find something that connects to you and to your story and to your life, and to kind of give you a little hope and inspiration and comfort and whatever you want to find from history. That's what history does.
And what programs do we have going on?
So the big things we do, we always offer programs inside here, the historic Wesleyan Chapel. We offer them daily. This is the premier site for the park. The park is made up of about 4 different locations, but this is the premier one. This is where the 1848 convention will happen. We offer a program here 3 times a day. I do it on the odd hours, 11, 1, and 3. The programs will talk about the first convention, what happens here, a little bit about the building, a little bit about what comes before and after, but it often focuses on why here, what happens here, what's going on here. In addition, because it's Women's History Month, we start doing our programs at the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House, which during the winter is often closed, but we'll get it open in the spring and March for Women's History Month. We'll do tours of the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House. That is the home Elizabeth lived in from 1847 to 1862. She lives in Seneca Falls for about 15 years. It's very much where the story begins. It's part of her moving to Seneca Falls will inspire her to do the convention. Part of it will just kind of build on her life work. Not connected to the convention, but a few years after the convention here in 1848 and 1851, in downtown Seneca Falls, Elizabeth Cady Stanton will very famously be introduced to Susan B. Anthony, a young Quaker woman, and they immediately strike up a friendship. They become friends, and they will form a lifelong, 50-year-long partnership, friendship, working together, and it really shapes in that house. So it's a really beautiful spot to be it's a place where that friendship is made. I would argue, or I have argued, I argue many days, that it's probably the most powerful political friendship in American history. It is a 50-year-long friendship. I look around for other ones that are anywhere close. It's very hard to find anything like that. They are in sync literally for 50 years. They are working on different issues, primarily women's suffrage, but a whole host of other issues too. Everything from property rights to divorce rights to, right to conscience, all these different things, right to have your own thoughts and to be your own person, and all those different things that we don't often, we get missed in the idea of suffrage. Suffrage becomes the dominant, or the vote becomes the dominant idea as kind of the gateway to all those other rights, and it definitely becomes a part of it, but it's all being shaped, began with the friendship of these two women in some home, in a little tiny 3-bedroom house. Well, it's larger at the time, but
Yeah.
But this little tiny house where people are making friends and families and things like that. So it's a cool part to that idea. Elizabeth has the very famous quote. I'm not breaking new ground here. That she will make the statement that she crafted the thunderbolt and Susan hurled it. And what that truly means is that Elizabeth is here in Seneca Falls. She's here at that house. She's raising her family. She'll have 7 children, doing all these other things. But she's a writer. She's a thinker. She's doing all this stuff, and she wants to get these ideas out. She wants to get them out there and work on them and active. But she has obligations here. Susan does not. Susan does not have children, is not married, and she has the ability to go across the nation. Many of the speeches that Susan B. Anthony gives across America are written for her by Elizabeth, and that's what she means by crafting the thunderbolt. Susan goes out and hurls it. So it's a very beautiful part to it.
So why is it important for people all throughout the Finger Lakes region to come here and to take part in these programs during Women's History Month?
Well, I would say that they're welcome to come anytime. We're always going to offer programs. It's a Women's History Month, just like I said earlier, is kind of, it's a chance to reconnect. It's a chance to remind yourself. It's a chance to see, to think about these stories, think about things we often don't talk about, and remind yourself that there is this story here, and that is a beautiful story. And it's not just a Finger Lakes story. It's an American story. It's a world history story. I mean, there's effects are shaping our experience right now today. And so it's just your opportunity. It's your chance. I would say come anytime, but if you got a chance in Women's History Month, definitely do it. It's appropriate time to do it. It's a way to get your family together. It might be just a way to tell your family, hey, we're going to do this now, instead of some other time.